RBI Governor salaries rupees 4 lakh per year.
मैंने तब गलत बोला है. It's
सर आपने दोनों गवर्नमेंट्स के साथ काम किया हुआ है. What is something that you really liked, admired, learned from them?
डॉक्टर मनमोहन सिंह जी सुनते थे और कम बोलते थे, लेकिन जब बोलते थे तो he had a lot of understanding, a lot of knowledge. मोदी जी तो he is like मनमोहन सिंह जी was very.
लेडीज एंड जेंटलमैन, आज के हमारे पॉडकास्ट में डॉक्टर रघुराम राजन हैं, जो फॉर्मर आरबीआई गवर्नर और ग्लोबली रिनाउंड इकोनॉमिस्ट हैं, जिन्होंने 2005 में ग्लोबल फाइनेंशियल क्राइसिस को एक्यूरेटली प्रिडिक्ट किया था. आज वो हमें इंडिया की इकोनॉमी, एआई रिवॉल्यूशन और यंग प्रोफेशनल्स के लिए वैल्यूएबल एडवाइस शेयर करेंगे.
क्या ऐसा हो सकता है इन द नेक्स्ट ईयर्स या 5 years में जो गलत हो सकता है?
I think if you look at the patterns, the roots of a crisis always come from.
थिंक आपके लिए वो सबसे टफ डिसीजन हुआ होगा, राइट, टू रेज इंटरेस्ट रेट्स इन ऑर्डर टू रिड्यूस इन्फ्लेशन.
You know, what people don't understand is I raised interest rates only in the Congress regime. I cut interest rates only in the BJP regime. But I still have BJP people saying, oh, you raised interest rates.
I want to ask you your views on the Indian stock market versus the US stock markets. आपको क्या लग रहा है in terms of valuation? Overvalued है, undervalued है?
I would say that these tariff negotiations with the US are resolved. And if we bring it back to levels which are similar to our competitors.
If you were offered to become the RBI governor again, would you accept it?
अगर अच्छा मौका मिलता है तो.
वीडियो देखने से पहले मेरी एक रिक्वेस्ट है आप सबसे. मैं YouTube एनालिटिक्स देख रहा था एंड वहाँ पर देखा कि 82.6% ऑफ माय ऑडियंस हु इज वाचिंग दिस कंटेंट हैज नॉट सब्सक्राइब टू द चैनल. अगर मैंने आपको थोड़ी सी वैल्यू प्रोवाइड की होगी एंड आपको अगर कंटेंट बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है, आई रिक्वेस्ट ऑल ऑफ यू टू प्लीज हिट द सब्सक्राइब बटन सो दैट वी कैन ब्रिंग यू द बेस्ट क्वालिटी ऑफ गेस्ट एंड गिव यू द मैक्सिमम वैल्यू पॉसिबल. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर सब्सक्राइबिंग टू आवर चैनल एंड एंजॉय दिस एंटायर एपिसोड ऑफ कॉन्वर्सेशन विद कुशल. तो एक्चुअली आरबीआई गवर्नर की स्टिंट की बात करते हैं सर. सो उसमें लाइक थोड़ा आपके बारे में ये जानना था कि वो स्टिंट का पूरा लाइक एक्सपीरियंस कैसा रहा था एंड उसमें क्या डिसीजंस थे जो वर्कआउट किए थे एंड कौन से डिसीजंस थे जो लाइक वर्कआउट नहीं किए थे. तो फर्स्टली लाइक वांटेड टू अंडरस्टैंड कि जब आप आरबीआई गवर्नर थे, आपके हिसाब से कौन सा बेस्ट डिसीजन हुआ था वो टेन्योर पे एंड कौन सा डिसीजन ऐसा था जो आपको लगता है कि नहीं लेना चाहिए था आपने?
तो एक्सपीरियंस तो बहुत ही अच्छा था. जब मैं शाम को बाहर निकला आरबीआई से, तो काफ़ी सारे दिन मैं ये सोच रहा था कि हमने आज कुछ किया, हमने कुछ अचीव किया आरबीआई में. और वैसा फीलिंग कोई और जॉब में नहीं मिलता है. यूजुअली एट द एंड ऑफ द डे यू से हाँ ठीक है, अनदर डे. बट एट द आरबीआई यू थॉट कि आई मूव द नीडल फॉरवर्ड टुडे. So it was a great experience. Successful, कई चीज़ें हमने किया है. जैसे कि जब मैं आया था तो एक एक्सचेंज क्राइसिस चल रहा था, वो टेपर टैंट्रम. तो we announced a set of measures which stabilized the feeling. More than sort of actual actions, it was the mood that needed to be stabilized. Sense that India couldn't do anything. We were one of the fragile five. And I think the set of actions we announced helped stabilize. And then we carried out those actions, which were very helpful. And the rupee sort of strengthened over time from being excessively weak. And we built up foreign exchange reserves. All that was part of the package, and that was you know, as a package, I thought that was an important achievement. Two areas where I think I would have liked, one where I would have liked to do more, and one where I think I was a failure. Where I would have liked to do more was on cleaning up the banks. We started the process, but we didn't have the bankruptcy code at the time when I was there. It was enacted towards the end, and then we had that later. So getting the borrowers to repay the loans that they defaulted on and could pay, or we could collect on, that was a process that I left unfinished. I would have liked to see that process finished, but my term was up. Later on, I met one of the big defaulters And he told me, "Sir, हमने सारा पैसा चुका लिया. We gave it all back." And I thought that was a vindication of of what we did, because this was one of the big serial defaulters. Um, I think so. That was unfinished, but we started the process. The place where I thought I failed was in trying to persuade the government not to go into demonetization. It was on the cards. We were asked to prepare for it. I knew that legally we could not stop it as the RBI. So we had to persuade the government not to do it. And, I tried. Didn't work. And I think the country paid some price for it. I don't think it was a success. But, you win some, you lose some. I think I lost that one.
तो आपके टेन्योर के बाद देयर हैव बीन चेंजेस इन आरबीआई गवर्नर्स एंड उसके बाद भी लाइक देयर हैव बीन अ लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स दैट हैव हैपेंड आफ्टर योर टेन्योर वाज ओवर. तो उसके बाद व्हाट डू यू थिंक हैज बीन लाइक वन डिसीजन दैट इज समथिंग व्हिच वेंट रियली राइट एंड आफ्टर दैट लाइक इन द लास्ट 9 years what has been something like what is one decision that you think कि हाँ ये सही नहीं लिया है by the government of India?
See, I think the one's big success people don't pay enough attention to is that we started the inflation targeting regime, and it has kept inflation really low through the pandemic, through these ups and downs in oil prices and so on. The fact that Indian inflation, which used to be double digits when I came in, is now something that, महंगाई तो एक लोग महंगाई के बारे में सोचते हैं, लेकिन it's not the most important thing for them. Because when you look at the price of vegetables, this, that, they keep going up and down, but they're controlled. Uh, and I think that big success, the fact that earlier we used to have periods of very high inflation that used to be a real political problem. Now it's much more contained. And I think that's the success the RBI is at. And it has taken multiple governors, but it's also the regime change that we did. We moved to an inflation targeting regime, and that has helped. So, if you ask me for a success over time, I would say that. I would also say the cleanup. The cleanup of the banks happened. Again, started, but finished. And finishing took, governors like Urjit Patel were quite important in making that happen. What I mean, I would say that till now uh, as far as the financial sector in RBI, I'm not talking about government broadly. I'm talking about RBI and the financial sector. Where we still need to do more work is to make it easier for people to invest, both Indians but also foreign investors to come into India in a way that they don't any longer complain about the bureaucracy or ye form bharna hai, wo form bharna hai. So we need to make it easier. Jaise ki if you want to, my favorite example was when Dr. Subbarao, my predecessor, wanted to open a bank account after leaving office. He couldn't because the KYC norms didn't. he didn't have an easy way to satisfy the KYC norms. Now, I think we've improved on that quite a bit, but we need to keep looking at the आम जनता का experience. क्या ठीक है कि नहीं? क्या is it easy? And if it isn't, we should work on it.
The new RBI governor also coined a new term called aspirational growth. So aspirational growth is something जो अभी एक नया term coin हुआ है. So what are your thoughts on that firstly? And do you think that is a term which should have like a lot of relevance in the sense that should we consider aspirational growth or should we consider the past real nominal growth which is happening?
No, I think aspirational growth is good. It is something to aspire for as a country, Because if you don't have ambition, you won't get anywhere. And it is good for India to be an ambitious country. But it is bad for India to think it has reached. That has always been my distinction. Ki, um, uh, uh, we should have ambition. We should dream of the world. ख्वाब पे अच्छे हैं, but we should have a possibility of reaching them. And for that, we have to do the homework. You can't dream and say we are there because we're not. And this is the problem I see when we constantly sort of think that we are already a superpower. We're not. We can get there. We will probably get there if we do the right things, but we're still a long way from there. And that means working every day wherever you are, whether you're in the armed forces, whether you're in the civilian population, whether you're in academia, whether you are in a doctor. I mean, building India is a job that we have to continue doing for the next 30 years before we can relax a little bit. And that's where the aspiration is important. We want to achieve big things. I like the Prime Minister's ambition to make India विकसित भारत, लेकिन उसके लिए काम करना है. और that I think sometimes we miss. हम सोचते हैं कि अभी भी विकसित हैं. नहीं, काफी दूर है.
एंड सर आपने एक पॉडकास्ट पे बताया था दैट आरबीआई गवर्नर सैलरी इज ₹4 लाख पर ईयर and you had mentioned that the non-monetary perquisites which are there are like the house which is given to the RBI governor, and if it was sold, it would have been worth 450 crores. So how is this compared to, let's say, other countries, and do you think there needs to be like some change in compensations?
मैंने तब गलत बोला है. It's 4 lakhs per month, not 4 lakhs per year.
Okay.
4 lakhs per month, yeah. About $5,000 it was at that time. उस पे तो टैक्स लगता है वगैरह वगैरह. तो लेकिन बात सही है कि सबसे बड़ा कॉम्पनसेशन घर है. और ये सिर्फ आरबीआई गवर्नर के लिए नहीं है. एसबीआई चेयरमैन भी, उनका घर मुंबई में बहुत शानदार घर है. और मेरे ख्याल में दिस इज पार्ट ऑफ सिविल सर्विस, राइट? If you look at secretaries' houses in Delhi, they sit next to $40-50 million houses on Prithviraj Road. But the day they retire, they can't afford it anymore. That's, perks and power are part of the reward for being in the civil service. But it also is important that you exercise it judiciously and that you're not swayed by the monetary rewards. And that's important because if you start believing that that is your due, then after you retire, you will take a job with a big industrialist, and then you will start lobbying your friends and in industry, and you'll get paid a lot. But it's not necessarily the most ethical use if you're not lobbying in a proper way. So we do need to pay our civil servants adequate amounts. But I think if you look at our civil service pay, the lower end is actually quite well remunerated. That's why everybody wants a civil service job. The issue comes at the top end where the salaries are the highest, but the comparison to the kind of jobs they could have had in industry and so on, there's the biggest difference. So, take, for example, some of our, IAS people at the top who, came from the IITs, and then you compare them with their batchmates. I'm sure the batchmates make 3 or 4 times what they make. So that difference is there. you have to believe that the compensation is you get to do work that you think is really important for the country, but you can't match that.
राइट। सर आपने दोनों गवर्नमेंट्स के साथ काम किया हुआ है। सो व्हाट वाज़ योर एक्सपीरियंस ऑफ वर्किंग विद डिफरेंट इंडियन प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स एंड आपका एक्सपीरियंस जो है लाइक आप कैसे कैटेगराइज़ करोगे इन द सेंस लाइक व्हाट इज़ समथिंग दैट यू रियली लाइक्ड, एडमायर्ड, लर्न्ड फ्रॉम देम एंड आपको कैसे हेल्प हुआ था?
तो मैंने डॉक्टर मनमोहन सिंह के साथ काम किया, प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी के साथ भी काम किया, फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर मेरे वक्त में मेरे टाइम में अरुण जेटली जी थे, और उससे पहले चिदम्बरम जी थे। तो इन सब के साथ काम किया, और सब काफ़ी एक्स्ट्रॉर्डनरी इंडिविजुअल्स हैं। वहाँ पहुँचने के लिए you have to be very capable. But they had different styles. डॉक्टर मनमोहन सिंह जी सुनते थे, और कम बोलते थे, लेकिन जब बोलते थे तो he had a lot of understanding, a lot of knowledge, and he would advise gently कि आप ये क्यों नहीं ट्राई करते हैं, and that was useful. Um, uh, Modi ji, though, he is like Manmohan Singh ji, was very always very alert and quick to pick up the issues, even though he's not an economist. He listened and was quick to pick up, and you could see over time that his understanding of the issues, because he was the chief minister, not a prime minister, his understanding sort of changed over time. I think the both Arun Jaitley and sort of Mr. Chidambaram were art lawyers, and so their approach. I mean, they extremely clever. They were both extremely understood propriety. So they never pushed you where they thought you had to make a decision on your own. They would suggest, ये क्यों नहीं, ये देखिए देखिए कि कुछ आप कुछ कर सकते हैं इसमें कि नहीं, बट नेवर आपको ये करना पड़ेगा. Anything came in the way of suggestion, and then you could go back and say नहीं हुआ और नहीं कर सकता हूँ, uh, and and they would take it. So the equation was always a very good one. They knew I would try if they asked for something, and I knew that if I said it couldn't be done, they would respect that. But in general, and this is what I experienced through both governments, there was never uh, a underhand deal that either wanted you to do. I mean, there's so much capability. I mean, there are requests which are, this might be easier than that, but every politician wants lower interest rates, and you try to get the pace of interest rates down to what is consistent with inflation. But they understand that if inflation sort of goes up, you're responsible. So they will, ask you. But if you say नहीं हो सकता, they won't say कि हाँ करना पड़ेगा.
आई थिंक आपके लिए वो सबसे टफ डिसीजन हुआ होगा, राइट? लाइक टू रेज इंटरेस्ट रेट्स इन ऑर्डर टू रिड्यूस इन्फ्लेशन, स्पेशली व्हेन अ लॉट ऑफ बिजनेसमैन वर सेइंग दैट देयर बोरोइंग्स कॉस्ट ऑफ कैपिटल हैड इंक्रीज्ड। तो सबसे टफ डिसीजन वही हुआ होगा आपके लिए, राइट?
Partly because I was the person who made the decision. एक ही आदमी था जिसके हाथ में डिसीजन था, और निर्णय लेने से पहले इतने सारे लोग आते थे कि कम कीजिए, you know, नुकसान पड़ रहा है. Especially businessmen used to see the politicians. And businessmen will always say, "Oh, what does this fellow know? बाहर से आया, academic है, ये कुछ नहीं जानते हैं." Uh, so you have to persuade because you can never say कि हाँ मैं नहीं करूँगा. It's always I will listen to you, but I will then come out with what the decision is. And so at the end of it, I think you have to persuade. Um, and That's why we moved to an inflation targeting committee. I put the structure in place so that the next meeting after I left was inflation targeting, because you can't persuade a committee, or you can't pressurize a whole committee. You can pressure individuals, but I think we, because of the respect that the RBI had, and because of the willingness of politicians to understand that if there was higher inflation, it would be, my problem. So they knew to push, but not to push beyond a certain point. And, what people don't understand is I raised interest rates only in the Congress regime. I cut interest rates only in the BJP regime. But I still have BJP people saying, "Oh, you raised interest rates." Nahi, boss. I cut interest rates in your time. Don't. It wasn't that I was trying to destroy your economy, and we brought down inflation. It was double digits. When I left, it was in the middle of our inflation band. So we brought down inflation, but it requires people to understand that this was not political at all. I raised interest rates soon after taking office, and I was able to cut them by the time I left quite a bit. In fact, much more than I raised them.
राइट। सर आरबीआई गवर्नर की लाइफ में एक टिपिकल डे कैसा होता है? कैन यू वॉक मी थ्रू द रूटीन सुबह से लेकर रात तक कैसे चीज़ें होती हैं?
मैं तो ऑफिस जाने से पहले स्क्वाश खेलता था. तो सुबह वो जिमखाना जाता था और वहाँ पे किसी के साथ स्क्वाश खेल के फिर मैं ऑफिस गया. It was lucky that in the office there was a shower, so I could shower, put on my suit, and then start the day. So usually there are meetings. There's also some, some documents you have to read. Ki we are going to come out with this policy, say on, debt restructuring. So you have to read that policy. It has come up through a whole lot of departments. They've looked at it. They've offered their comments. Now it's the final version. So you look at it, you sort of call the people, and then they say, these are the big changes. This is why we want to do them. And that's important because you are trying to understand their rationale. But I was also coming from the outside with a lot of academic training. So I also wanted to ask, is this rationale right? कि हम 25 साल से ये कर रहे हैं, क्या ये ठीक है? क्या कुछ और कर सकते हैं? And so I think that combination of my willingness to ask questions and their experience helped us get it right. So there might be some policies on let's say debt restructuring, but then there's also internal issues. We were trying to reorganize the RBI, reorganize departments, change the evaluation process. तो उसके लिए भी हमने कमिटी सेटअप किया, और those committees reported back. So it was an exciting time, lots of change. Then you have lunch, and lunch I often used to have somebody come in from the outside to talk to them, maybe a business person, maybe a social activist, talk to them about what they were doing and why they were doing it. And people used to accept that invitation. Muft ka lunch mil raha tha, or they got to see the RBI a little bit. then afternoon. That's when I had a TV in my office where I every day watched where the rupee was, because you remember when I came in, there was a rupee crisis. So the rupee was a way of trying to see whether we were doing okay. So we nursed the rupee back to health, and that was part of the daily routine. Then there's something or the other every day came up, some issue. There were times when you might think you're working all the time. No, there are times that you say, "Acha, there's nothing really on my plate today. Uh, Maybe I can and call it a day." There are also foreign meetings. Every 6 weeks, you go to Basel for the meeting of the BIS, where all the other central bankers come. So you talk to them also, find out what's going on. You deal with international regulation, which Indian banks were subject to. So it was a full day. And as I said, on a number of evenings, you left saying that I really did something. I moved the needle. And that was a wonderful experience.
So typically, how many hours you used to work in a day?
Well, I used to work a lot at night once I got back from the office after, dinner and all that, because I wrote all my speeches. And I didn't have a speechwriter write them. I used to write my speeches, then um, edit them based on comments from the staff. So I would say it was a full day. Um, 10 hours, 6 days a week. That's about average week. It would be. But sometimes it was more. You go for a trip to um, Basel, and then you come back, and then there's so much pending that you have to work much harder to get it out.
So you had predicted the global financial crisis back in 2005, and in 2008 we saw the global financial crisis. अभी at present आपको क्या लगता है कि क्या या तो क्राइसिस या तो क्या ऐसा हो सकता है इन द नेक्स्ट 3 years या 5 years में जो गलत हो सकता है, एंड इंडिया इंडिया में ऐसा हो सकता है, तो इंडिया के बाहर भी कहाँ पर भी, लाइक व्हाट इज योर प्रेडिक्शन कि कौन सा कुछ क्या हो सकता है इन द नेक्स्ट 3 to 5 years?
Prediction is always hard. Huh? Sometimes you're lucky and it turns out right, but it's hard. I think if you look at the patterns, um, the roots of a crisis always come from excess euphoria, but also supported by things like very loose monetary policy, very loose supervision, and too much deregulation. I don't think a crisis is imminent in the US, though there have been sort of signs of difficult credits. But I think these are the conditions in which the conditions for a crisis are set. And what I mean by crisis is not just, AI companies, their stock prices going down or something like that. वो तो होने वाला है. There has to be some correction at some point. It can't keep going up. But the real issue is where that becomes a economy-wide crisis, and typically that happens when there are firms that have borrowed a lot, financial firms or real firms that have borrowed a lot that can't make payments. A debt crisis is what creates a crisis. Right now, I think there are some areas of excess debt. Some companies have borrowed a lot. Some financial firms are over indebted. But it's not in the US. It's not across the board. Many companies have built some buffers and some reserves. But because the Fed is lowering interest rates, because there's sort of euphoria in the markets, the worry is if this continues for a little while, this is the time that the problems get accentuated. Entities start over borrowing. People, go to the extremes, and they have problems. So this is the time to be vigilant. And of course, the fact that US policy is volatile makes things even harder. That, if you take advantage of the easy money, and build up debt, you may find that policy changes and you're in deep trouble. जैसे कि अभी there's a agreement between China and the US on tariffs. But this is not a long-term agreement. This is a temporary agreement to not punish each other. It does matter whether they can reduce the temperature of the dialogue, because otherwise, 1 year from now, we're fighting all over again. So I would say that I am surprised at the buoyancy, the exuberance of financial markets, given how many risks there are. A lot of it is driven by hopes about AI. Almost surely, the hopes will not be. The hopes eventually will be achieved, but in the near term, disappointment is more likely than achievement. Uh, and so there will be some correction. The question is, does this flow through to everything else?
फिर आपने ये बताया था कि इंडियाज सेंसेक्स हैड ट्रिपल फ्रॉम 2014 टू 2023, बट ये ट्रिपल पहले भी हुआ था इन द प्रीसीडिंग डेकेड अंडर अ डिफरेंट गवर्नमेंट. एंड आपने बताया था दैट यूएस स्टॉक मार्केट जो S&P 500 दैट हैज आउटपेस्ड इंडियाज मार्केट इन सम रिसेंट ईयर्स. आई वांट टू आस्क यू योर व्यूज ऑन द इंडियन स्टॉक मार्केट वर्सेस द यूएस स्टॉक मार्केट्स. आपको क्या लग रहा है इन टर्म्स ऑफ वैल्यूएशंस? ओवर वैल्यूड है, अंडर वैल्यूड है? लाइक व्हाट इज योर थीसिस?
So that is something which is very hard to say. Uh, अगर ये मैं ठीक से कर पाता तो मैं अमीर आदमी होता. Recently, there's been more sort of downward pressure in the Indian market, and there's been more upward pressure in the US market. A lot of the difference seems to be about AI and how it will be utilized. And my sense is any new technology, there's a lot more euphoria, which tends to be disappointed at first if you look at the pattern. And then eventually it happens. जैसे कि internet stocks थे. Amazon used to be thought of very highly in the dot-com boom and then collapsed. And if we'd all bought Amazon then, we'd be very rich now. But Amazon came back up and now is floating high because of AI. In fact, yesterday's news that Amazon's its cloud services were doing well was a boost to Amazon. So I think the bottom line is that the euphoria has shifted to the US from India. There was a time when everybody was euphoric about India. Now with the tariffs and so on, there may be a more pessimism in India about India. So I would say that with the hope that these tariff negotiations with the US are resolved, there's no reason why India should be tariffs more than every other country in the world. And if we bring it back to levels which are similar to our competitors, between 10 and 20%, I think the hope for India's growth will again improve. Again, India is growing reasonably well, but there's this cloud on India's growth from the tariffs and so on. So the hopes of the foreign investors will improve, and the anticipation, the ambition for India will improve, and so India will do better when that happens.
So from what I understand, आप बोल रहे हो like foreign investment बढ़ जाएगा इंडिया में and long term Indian stock markets are bullish in the sense long term में like they'll perform better is what
I think so. I think so. It's always hard to tell because the current level and the future level. If the current level is too high, the future level, the change will not be that high. But I think if India develops as promised, there's no reason why India's stock market should hold back. There will be periods of overvaluation, periods of undervaluation, but if you stay for the long run, there's no reason why you won't be, getting adequate returns.
What's the most interesting project that you're working on currently, and how's your typical day going like?
Well, interesting projects. I'm working on a new book, which is on the corporation. And this is probably the most important organization in human history, center of capitalism and all that. And of course, the question is it structured right for the world of the future? What do we need to change? It's a big issue in India, right? We have a few corporations dominating the landscape. Is that the right structure going forward? So it's central question in economics, but of great sort of political importance, but also economic relevance as we go into the world of AI. So that's the project that's exciting me now.
And so, what's your underlying thesis on that? So, like, if we talk about the Indian economy and cooperation, so what do you think? Like, is that something which is needed, or what's your underlying thesis?
Well, it's a very efficient structure, provided you allow competition. Competition sort of brings out the efficiency in corporations, so they become more innovative, et cetera, et cetera. The question is how much competition, and competition also limits what they can do. So, companies can go off on a tangent and say we're about saving the world, we are going to do a lot of CSR, et cetera. But competition will limit how much they can do. At the same time, competition also prevents them from being fat and lazy and not innovating. I mean, these are all questions we need to ask in India, right? How much do we have enough competition? Why have we lost out on the race to, AI, to China and to the US? Why don't we, we won the software race early on with Infosys, with TCS, and so on. What is their presence in AI? What is the presence of entities like Reliance Jio in the larger landscape of social media, in the landscape of providing more services? So, I mean, these are relevant questions for India because I think our growth will come through these corporations, not primarily through the government. The government will create the environment, but the corporations will take us forward, and we need to understand: do we have the right corporate environment?
And when you say that the growth is going to come from these corporations and not from the government, so let's talk about some of the things that aren't going well in Indian economy right now. And I want to discuss like each one of them in detail and what can be done by the government of India. So, what are like the top two or three challenges you are seeing in the Indian economy right now, and how do you think we can address that one by one?
Well, I always like to start with the cup half full, right? So let's just to mention a couple of things that are going well for India. Clearly, growth is strong. The numbers need to be looked at a little carefully because some of the growth comes from what is called the GDP deflator. We have sort of relatively moderate growth in GDP in rupee terms, but because inflation is really low, it boosts what is called the real growth. Now, how much of that is because of the way we calculate the deflator is something economists deliberate all the time. But certainly, relative to many other sort of big countries, we are growing fast. Of course, we're growing fast partly because we are one of the poorer countries. But you shouldn't diminish the fact that a lot of this is because we are, in fact, doing the right things, building out infrastructure. We are expanding in certain sort of important areas. Education, if you look at the number of educational institutions, is expanding quite a bit. Now the question is, are we doing it right? And that's where the cup half empty starts coming in, right? So the question is, why aren't we creating more jobs for the young people that we have? I mean, the job issue is probably the most important political issue that politicians focus on, but they don't really, many of them have easy solutions because the solutions are, in fact, hard. But that brings you to the second issue, that to really get the kind of jobs we need, the number, you need mass education of a quality level. You need people to have in if you look at our technical education, um, people should be graduating from high school with a better ability to deal with the fact that manufacturing jobs now are about manning the machine, not about doing the soldering on the workforce. So how many of our sort of students graduating from high school can go to a technical institute and get the capability of repairing machines, because that's where the good jobs are now. Similarly, how many of them can become good carpenters? Urban India is throwing up a huge number of opportunities. But I'll ask you, do you have a good carpenter? Do you have a good plumber? And the answer that many of my friends in India, in urban India, will give is no, it's really hard. And so that's an opportunity which can create many, many jobs. Our smallest village is 10,000 people. Our small villages, where, in other countries, this would be called a city. Uh, so there's a lot of scope for job creation in these areas. But for that, we need skilling, and we need to find a good skilling model. And so that's where we need, advancement. It's not rocket science. We're not talking about PhDs in AI or computer science. We're talking about basic knowledge. And there are some success stories in India. We have to learn from them and spread them. But at the same time, we do need those PhDs in AI, because we need to keep up in that race. And so then that becomes the bigger question for India. Where do we put resources? Do we put resources in building chip foundries, or do we put resources in building better educational institutions, including high quality universities? And my sense is we have to make those choices, because we can't do everything.
So, sir, you mentioned that PhD in AI, that is something which is needed here, and unemployment is something which is like a big problem. You also mentioned in one of the previous interviews that there were like 19 million people who applied for like 60,000 railway jobs in India, and you'd also mentioned that 50% of the graduates are unemployable. So, what is something that is what is something that can be done in order to reduce this unemployment crisis that India is facing, so that people also become like employable when they graduate immediately?
Well, so that's where we certainly need to take a very hard look at our entire education system and skilling process. And this is not just of what is taught in the classroom, but the attitudes we inculcate, right? Some of the places where there are jobs require working with your hands. In the age of AI, it still may be that the job of the plumber doesn't go away, because that's a unique job. But a variety of other jobs may go away. So, uh, but that requires people to say, I don't necessarily need a degree in French literature or in English literature. I'm happy to take a course, a technical course in modern plumbing, in dealing with the various situations that I find, and an apprenticeship program where I can work with a good plumber and learn the tools of the trade. How do we make that kind of transition where people stop sort of saying, everybody needs a college degree, and a variety of people say, okay, maybe I can go repair sinks and so on. Another set of people say, maybe aircraft engine are what I need to repair and learn to repair. But there are a variety of jobs. Many of them may require working with hands, but that requires first an attitude which is open to that, but it also requires a schooling which makes you able, when you finish school, you have enough of in capability in math, in the sciences, but also in communication, that you can go and do these courses and become an effective sort of worker. Being a plumber also requires entrepreneurship. If you are a self-employed plumber, you need to know how to price your services. You need to know what your costs are. I mean, that requires a fair amount of knowledge also. So it's not that you just pick somebody off the street who has no education whatsoever. So bottom line, it needs to be done all the way, from childhood to adulthood. And the point here is we are failing some of our kids even in childhood, right? I mean, one of the issues that is very worrisome for India is the number of malnutrition kids, even today, even as we are going into lower middle income. The curse of malnutrition, some people say it's not a problem, but it is a problem, because these kids that don't get enough to nutrition basically won't be able to work at the adult level when they grow up because their brains are stunted, their physical growth is stunted. So dealing with malnutrition today is very important if we want to become Viksit Bharat by 2047. We can't have 35% of the workforce which is in a precarious state as far as capabilities go. We have to compete with the rest of the world. So bringing down malnutrition has to be part of the answer to the problem that you posed.
What about the inequality which is also there? So you had given a very striking example that car sales were hitting new highs while two-wheeler sales are still below the pre-pandemic levels. And it seems that the upper middle class is thriving, but the lower income groups are still struggling. So what is happening here exactly? How are the spending habits different? And what is something that can be done to resolve the inequality problem?
First, inequality is an issue. The size of the problem, of course, varies over time. So, what we've seen is two reasonably good monsoons and harvests are up. So that is helping, just as a ballpark, 50% of India lives in the villages. Not all of them are tied to rural jobs. Some of them are, semi-rural or rural-burn jobs. But so when harvests are good, I think prosperity starts coming back to them. And I think what you're seeing, that number which I said, is reversing a little bit. Two-wheeler sales are up once again, suggesting that they've made up some of what was missing earlier. But the broader point is productivity in agriculture is very low. So if you have a job in agriculture as an agricultural worker, you're not really making that much money. If and your next best alternative is to go to a job in construction. Construction is somewhat higher and is improving, but again is not great. What is ultimately needed are jobs in manufacturing and services. And services, as I said, you have moderate quality services like plumbing and carpentry, but over time you hope it goes to higher quality services, which are more white collar jobs, right? So we need to offer people the opportunity to migrate to those better jobs. A job is the best way to reduce inequality, and not uh, make work jobs where they don't really have any real work, but real jobs where they actually are productive. That increases GDP growth, but also gives us the money to pay for these people. So how do we get more people into good jobs in services and manufacturing? That has to be the primary question that we ask ourselves. And of course, we've got a lot of people at the front end who are doing work for multinationals in these global capability centers, working in Bangalore, Hyderabad, Gurgaon, etc. Those are at the top end of our job distribution, and hopefully, even with the advent of the AI revolution, they will learn to use AI in a way that makes them so successful. That is also where the labor arbitrage is. To employ such a worker in the US costs 250,000. To employ such a worker in India costs $50,000, which is a huge amount in Indian rupees, gives them a fantastic lifestyle, but still means that companies sort of benefit from hiring them. So these are the, people like you, top quality sort of individuals. Of course, the issue is how do we get the rest of India up? And that's where the broader job creation is important. Urbanization is beneficial, but urbanization has to be accompanied by strong job creation. Otherwise, we get masses of unemployed hanging around in the cities with nothing really to do, which is a pretty explosive situation. So we do need to focus on the job creation, which goes back to the issues of education and skilling, and also healthcare. Many of our workers, because of their poor nutrition leading up to adulthood, don't have healthy sort of outcomes. They fall sick more often. Their bodies are not as strong, and that also is something we need to take care of.
You mentioned about GCC, the Global Capability Centers, and I'll talk about my field, which is accounting. Okay, so in accountancy, a lot of jobs have been created in GCCs where a lot of people are working with, let's say, companies in the US, etc., and helping them with filing their returns or helping them with their accounting. All the back end work is outsourced to India, and that's why even like in Gift City, which is there, a lot of like financial services companies have been like incorporated. Apart from this, are there any other industries or are there any sectors you think there is a white space for jobs? And if we focus on them, a lot of job creation can happen in India.
So I think the amount of jobs that will be outward focused, uh, there are, but they're limited, right? They typically will look for the best talent, and increasingly they want that talent to also be AI savvy because a lot can be done with AI. So, for example, consulting. The best sort of students graduating from the IIMs can now, do consulting assignments in the UK or the US, sitting in Bangalore or Hyderabad or Raigad. They can do that, and so I think that is an opportunity which we shouldn't give up, but we also must recognize it's limited. There's only so many sort of jobs we can, and increasingly we should try and find ways to capture the value added here. Because right now the value added is being captured by foreign companies employing our best people. What about Indian companies employing those people and giving services to the rest of the world? That requires Indian innovation, which we need more of. But really, I think the white spaces there are more limited by the number of people we have who have that kind of capability than the fact that there's a limited amount of work there, because that kind of labor arbitrage can take place over a long time. That said, we have to also be wary that there often will be a backlash. Oh, all these jobs are going to India. Let's put a tariff on outsourcing jobs. There's a bill in front of Congress today called the Hires Act, which is trying to put a tariff on jobs outsourced to India. I think the Indian advantage still is quite strong, despite any talk of tariffs. And putting tariffs on services is much harder. But it is something we have to be wary of. I think the greater white space is in fulfilling the needs of urban India. And this is where, your first comment about inequality. Uh, Inequality can be reduced if the more wealthy middle class, upper middle class people pay for services from the lower middle class. Now, hopefully, what that does is that income that the lower middle class earns then becomes a way for them to climb up the ladder, because you see this all the time. The poor and the lower middle class want to put their kids in good schools so that the next generation then is much better equipped to compete in the labor force and gets good jobs, gets good outcomes. So I think of this as a process of development. I saw it in front of my eyes when I saw what are termed class 4 employees at the RBI, and they were basically peons and support staff, drivers, and so on. The kids were all Infosys bank managers. They had made that transition in one generation, and I think India as a whole can make that transition if we sort of accept that there will be transition jobs, that the job creation will not immediately put everybody in university, and maybe the country doesn't need that, but it will give a lot of people a chance of a better life. And hope is really important to hold out to people so that they can continue with their daily lives.
अ, तो सर हमने जैसे स्टॉक मार्केट्स का डिस्कस किया। आई वांटेड टू डिस्कस वन मोर थिंग। आरबीआई डेटा ये शो कर रहा है दैट क्रेडिट कार्ड एनपीएस हैव स्पाइक्ड 500% इन द लास्ट 4 years। तो मेरे को ये पूछना था आपका व्यू दैट वेदर दिस इज लाइक अ थ्रेट गोइंग फॉरवर्ड एंड व्हाट हैज बीन लाइक द रीजन फॉर ऑल दीज क्रेडिट कार्ड एनपीएस।
सो मैं तो इस डेटा के बारे में काफी कुछ जानता नहीं हूँ. I don't know where it is coming from and what the who is involved. But credit card lending has expanded quite a bit. And one of the worries that I think was being expressed is a lot of young people who get access to these credit cards, whether they're borrowing for speculative purposes. There was some concern with the people betting on options in the stock market, whether they were betting out of their own money or whether they were borrowing to bet. I think it is worth checking whether this is the source of some of the concern, but also more generally, if it reflects either a excessive expansion of giving people credit cards by the credit card issuers, or whether it reflects people genuinely getting into trouble because their incomes have fallen and they're trying to make do with the credit card. Sometimes credit card borrowing also reflects, genuine entrepreneurship. There are lots of stories of young people who have built businesses based on credit card borrowing because they don't get access to bank loans. Without knowing where the source of the default is coming from, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Generally, defaults are bad, but it could be, it is something that needs to be investigated further. The fact that it's gone up 500%, the expansion in credit cards also has been quite a bit. And also, whenever a new instrument comes out, it takes time for people to use it to a big extent, and then to make mistakes. So some of that may just be that it's the expansion has been large, and we're seeing the consequences. But it is certainly data that cannot be ignored. We need to understand it better.
And asking you about the gold thing as well. So now India is bringing a lot of gold back from other countries. And FY26 data, if we look at the first half, RBI got home 64 tons of gold, which was mentioned in the news as well. What do you think is the reason, and how will this impact the gold prices going forward, according to you?
I think central banks are trying to diversify their holdings. They worry about being overly exposed to industrial countries, including the United States. Typically, US bonds are about 60% of reserves for a typical central bank. So, with the kind of policy uncertainty that's coming out from the West, as also the experience with Russia, where a fair amount of their reserves were sequestered by Europe and the United States, countries are saying maybe we need more diversification. Supposing we get into trouble with the West, we don't want our reserves sort of to be held up. At the same time, the West is where the most liquid markets are, so you can't diversify too much away from it. So one of the places where central banks are putting their money is in gold. And it's not just India, a number of other central banks are increasing their gold holdings. Now, there's only so much you can do with gold, because if you actually want to pay somebody in gold, you've got to transport the gold to their country. And gold transportation, believe me, is very costly. You need to put it in a pretty strong 747 or and you need to insure it, because if that gold gets destroyed in a crash, you've lost a lot of money. So when I was in the RBI, we learned a fair amount of our reserves were in London. So we actually decided we'd bring it back into India, because what's the point of having your reserves when it's in some other country?
So one question. So what is one advice at present you would want to give to the following political leaders? So number one, Donald Trump.
I would say that, by all means experiment, but then take note of what you've done and see what the consequences are, and then adjust accordingly. Don't be swayed by some ideology that tariffs are a good thing, that the US will be better as a result. You have a bunch of experiments running, see what happens a year from now, and act accordingly. He's a practical businessman, and so he should see that.
Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping, I think the big issue for China is its growth prospects, its growth model. And I think what they're doing is doubling down on the manufacturing led growth. And what they need to see is where the markets for that are, because those markets are going to get harder and harder when, you know, when the US closes down, they want to put more goods into Europe, into India. But these markets are also going to become more hostile to to Chinese sort of production. I think China could benefit from, trying to see where it could invest and become more partners with countries in their growth rather than seeing them only as markets. And that's something to think about. I mean, I think India would be welcoming more Chinese investment into India, but just Chinese goods coming into India, eventually there will be more of a reaction.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
What can I tell the Prime Minister? I think um, some of the projects that have been proposed by the government, I think the value is seeing what their consequences are. So similar to the, uh, you know, uh, we have, for example, skilling programs that were announced a year or more ago. We have this committee which is going to look at reforming laws so that doing business becomes easier. I think we need follow up. What happened to those killing? Has there been sufficient evidence of success? Who's doing better? Can we learn from that? Similarly, I think that committee, I haven't seen it sort of come out with any kind of recommendations. I think it was a good idea of the CEA to do that, but it's important it come out with recommendations and it be implemented. I always said in the RBI, the big problem in India is implementation. We need to implement. And I think the Prime Minister's office has been pushing that, but it needs to push more at this point because we need a fresh set of energy in our growth.
If you were offered to become the RBI governor again, would you accept it?
In life, you always have to look ahead. What are the things, the challenges that I haven't had? So this is my advice for young people also. Keep looking to see what are the things that you haven't done that you would that make you a little scared. Those are the things you should try. Those will give you a different experience. Those will make you rise to the challenge. And ultimately, life is about not feeling comfortable all the time, but by improving yourself. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
But like, let me rephrase my question. So, would you be thinking to, let's say, shift back to India? आप India आना चाहोगे कभी at time soon to settle in here?
Uh, अगर अच्छा मौका मिलता है तो जरूर. There has to be something where I find that I can actually make a difference. So I've been working, for example, with the government of Tamil Nadu on the side. Uh, the initial experience was very good. So I do some things. I work with the university, KRIA, where we're trying to build a first-rate university uh, and hopefully train a lot of young people in some of the things we talked about.
Amazing, sir. Thank you so much for doing this. बहुत मजा आया आपसे बात करके. One last question that I ask all my guests. If you were in the shoes of Kushal Lodha and if you were interviewing Mr. Raghuram Rajan, what is one question you would like to ask him towards the end?
That's a great question. I don't have the answer to that. Look, you've done a fantastic job. And, I like the fact that young professionals are branching out. You left a good job to do this, which is risky. But I'm sure you're so happy with the choice you made. And I think so. To answer your question, sometimes these questions should not be answered. But let me put it this way: I, I I think that the question I would ask you
Okay.
is what gave you the courage
Hmm.
to do this, And do you feel satisfied?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, absolutely, I feel more than satisfied. What gave me the courage, I think, was the fact that I was able to add real value to the audience, which I think I was not able to do it in my full time job. And secondly, I just thought that I wanted to do something which I was passionate about, and I wanted to add like real value to the society. So, I quit my job in June 2022. Luckily, I was making more money in content as compared to the salary. That became like a stability factor. And then as it is said, like, do what you love what you do. So I just chose the path of doing this.
I think your listeners will learn far more from that
No,
than from listening to me. So I
no,
think
no, sir.
that is wonderful, and thanks for doing this, and good luck with all that you're doing. I think bringing good information, good knowledge to your listeners is something which is of immense value. That's my business also. I do it on a much smaller scale than you do when I teach my students.
And not at all, sir. You're too modest. You're very kind, very humble. I really had an amazing time talking to you, and इतना ज़्यादा अच्छा feel हो रहा है. It's actually a dream come true moment for me. I've read so much about you even during my childhood, during my school days. बहुत अच्छा लगा आपसे बात करके. Thank you so much.
Shukriya ji, and good luck.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. Once, whenever if I'm in US, would love to meet. अगर आपको ये वीडियो पसंद आया होगा तो आई रिक्वेस्ट यू टू शेयर इट विद ऑल योर फ्रेंड्स एंड सब्सक्राइब टू आवर चैनल सो दैट वी कैन गिव यू मोर वैल्यू एडिटिव कंटेंट इन द शॉर्टेस्ट अमाउंट ऑफ टाइम. हमको ये बताइए कि आपको कौन से काइंड ऑफ गेस्ट चाहिए. हमको ये बताइए कि कौन से क्वेश्चंस मुझे नहीं पूछने चाहिए थे, कौन से क्वेश्चंस मुझे और पूछने चाहिए थे ताकि आपको और ज़्यादा वैल्यू मिल सके, और कौन से ऐसे पार्ट्स हैं जो आपको बिल्कुल पसंद नहीं आए ताकि हम लोग ये पार्ट स्ट्रीम कर सके फ्यूचर एपिसोड्स में. सो थैंक यू सो मच वंस अगेन फॉर वॉचिंग दिस एपिसोड एंड कीप शेयरिंग ऑल आवर एपिसोड्स विद योर फ्रेंड्स एंड कीप गिविंग अस फीडबैक so that we can improve and come up with better quality content.